in the small mountain town of Cedar Ridge, where everyone knew everyone else's business. Sarah Mitchell had become the most hated woman in the community. For 3 years, she couldn't walk down Main Street without feeling the weight of accusatory stares. Children were warned to stay away from her house. Store owners watched her every move when she shopped. A local newspaper had printed her name in connection with a crime that had shaken the town to its core. But what if everything they believed was wrong? What if the real criminal had been walking among them all along, trusted and respected, while an innocent woman bore the burden of their hatred? Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to dig beneath the surface of assumptions and reveal what really happened on that fateful night when Cedar Ridge lost its innocence forever. This is the story of how one man's relentless pursuit of justice exposed a web of lies that had fooled an entire town, and how the real criminal's downfall came from the most unexpected source of all. Sarah Mitchell's life changed forever on a cold October evening in 2019, when she heard the sirens screaming through Cedar Ridge. She was washing dishes in her small kitchen when the red and blue lights flashed past her window, heading toward the town center. Like most residents of the mountain community, Sarah felt a mixture of curiosity and concern. Crime was rare in Cedar Ridge, where the biggest news usually involved the annual Harvest Festival or high school football games. The next morning brought shocking headlines that would divide the town for years to come. The Cedar Ridge Community Bank had been robbed of nearly $200,000. The theft hadn't involved masks or weapons like in the movies. Instead, someone had used sophisticated computer skills to transfer money from multiple accounts into offshore banking systems. The FBI was already involved, treating it as a federal crime due to the electronic nature of the theft and the amount stolen. Sarah worked as a computer programmer for a small tech company that served several businesses in the region. She had helped design the bank's online security system 2 years earlier, which made her one of the few people in town with both the technical knowledge and access needed to pull off such a crime. When FBI agents knocked on her door 3 days after the robbery, she invited them in without hesitation, confident that her innocence would be quickly established. The interview lasted 4 hours. Agent Rebecca Torres and Agent Michael Chen were thorough but professional, asking detailed questions about Sarah's work at the bank, her financial situation, and her whereabouts on the night of the theft. Sarah answered everything honestly. She had been home alone that evening, working on a freelance project and watching Netflix. She had no witnesses to confirm her alibi, but she also had no motive to steal from a bank that had always treated her well. What Sarah didn't know was that the investigation had already found digital fingerprints pointing in her direction. The theft had been executed using administrator access codes that matched her work profile. Security cameras at the bank showed someone entering the building after hours using Sarah's access card. The timestamps on the computer logs indicated that the money transfers had been initiated from her workstation. When Agent Torres explained this evidence, Sarah felt the world spinning around her. She insisted that her access card had been in her purse all evening, and she could prove she hadn't left her house. But when she checked her purse, the card was missing. A desperate search of her car and home revealed nothing. The access card had vanished without explanation. The FBI agents exchanged meaningful glances. They had seen this response before from guilty suspects who realized their stories were falling apart. Agent Chen made a note in his file while Agent Torres continued the questioning. They asked about Sarah's recent financial troubles, having discovered that she was behind on her mortgage payments and had maxed out 2 credit cards. Sarah admitted to the money problems but explained that her difficulties were temporary, caused by a reduction in freelance work during the economic downturn. The agents left without making an arrest, but their departure felt more ominous than reassuring. Sarah called her lawyer, Janet Crawford, who had handled her home purchase and business contracts. Janet's voice was grave as she explained the seriousness of the situation. Federal bank fraud charges could result in decades in prison. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Janet recommended that Sarah prepare for the possibility of formal charges. News of the FBI visit spread through Cedar Ridge within hours. In a town of only 8,000 people, secrets were impossible to keep. Sarah's neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had watched the agents arrive and leave. By evening, half the town knew that Sarah Mitchell was the prime suspect in the bank robbery. The other half learnt about it the next morning. The reaction was swift and brutal. Sarah's phone started ringing with angry calls from people she had known for years. Former clients cancelled their contracts. Her part-time job at the local computer repair shop was terminated immediately. The owner, Bob Martinez, apologized, but explained that customers were already threatening to take their business elsewhere if Sarah remained employed there. Cedar Ridge had always prided itself on being a close-knit community where neighbors looked out for each other, but the bank robbery had stolen more than money. It had shattered the town's sense of security and trust. People needed someone to blame, and Sarah became the perfect target for their anger and fear. The harassment extended beyond phone calls and lost employment. Someone spray-painted "thief" on her garage door. Her car tires were slashed twice in the same week. Grocery shopping became an ordeal of whispered conversations and hostile stares. Children were told not to play near her house. Parents crossed the street rather than walk past her property. Sarah's small circle of close friends began to shrink. Some people genuinely believed she was guilty and wanted nothing to do with her. Others simply couldn't handle the social pressure of remaining loyal to someone the entire town had condemned. Only a few friends stood by her, including her college roommate Lisa and her elderly neighbor Mr. Patterson, who had known Sarah since she moved to Cedar Ridge 5 years earlier. The formal charges came 2 weeks later. Sarah was arrested on 3 federal counts of bank fraud, computer intrusion, and money laundering. The arrest took place early in the morning, with FBI agents appearing at her door with handcuffs and a warrant. The local newspaper photographer somehow arrived at the same time, capturing images of Sarah being led away that would be printed on the front page and shared thousands of times on social media. Janet Crawford arranged bail, but the damage was done. Sarah's mugshot and the story of her arrest had spread far beyond Cedar Ridge. Her parents, who lived across the country, called in tears after seeing their daughter's face on national news websites. Her professional reputation was destroyed. Even if she were eventually cleared of all charges, Sarah knew that the internet never forgets. The prosecution's case seemed airtight. They had security footage, digital evidence, access records, and a clear motive. Sarah's access card had been found in a dumpster behind the bank 2 days after the robbery, placed there, obviously by someone trying to dispose of evidence. The prosecution argued that Sarah had panicked after the FBI visit and gotten rid of the card to remove a crucial piece of evidence. Sarah maintained her innocence, but her protests fell on deaf ears. The community had made up its mind. She was guilty, and anything she said was just another lie from someone who had betrayed their trust. The bank robbery had hurt everyone in town. Interest rates had increased, loan approvals had become more difficult, and several elderly customers had lost portions of their life savings. People wanted justice, and they wanted it directed at Sarah Mitchell. As winter settled over Cedar Ridge, Sarah found herself completely isolated. She spent most of her time at home, afraid to venture into public. The legal bills were mounting, and with no income, she was facing financial ruin on top of potential imprisonment. Janet Crawford was doing her best, but the evidence against Sarah was overwhelming. The prosecution was offering a plea deal that would result in 15 years in federal prison, which seemed almost generous considering the maximum possible sentence was 40 years. The town had branded Sarah as a criminal, and there seemed to be no way to change their minds. The evidence was clear, the motive was established, and the community's anger demanded satisfaction. But in the mountains surrounding Cedar Ridge, a lone figure was beginning to take notice of the case. Marcus Reed was a retired detective who had moved to the area for the peace and quiet, but something about the bank robbery case bothered him. He had spent 30 years investigating crimes in Chicago, and his instincts told him that something was wrong with the neat narrative that everyone else accepted. Marcus had read every newspaper article about the case and watched Sarah's arrest from his cabin window. He didn't know Sarah personally, but he had observed her around town for months before the robbery. She seemed like a quiet, honest person who kept to herself and worked hard. The image of Sarah as a master criminal just didn't fit with his observations. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts during his decades in law enforcement, and those instincts were telling him that the real story might be very different from what everyone believed. The evidence against Sarah was certainly compelling, but Marcus had seen compelling evidence turn out to be wrong before. He had witnessed innocent people destroyed by circumstantial evidence while guilty parties walked free. The rush to judgment in Cedar Ridge reminded him of cases from his past where the obvious answer had been the wrong answer. Marcus decided that someone needed to take a closer look at the evidence, even if that someone was a retired detective with no official authority to investigate. As the first snows began to fall on Cedar Ridge, Marcus Reed started his own quiet investigation into the bank robbery. He didn't know if Sarah Mitchell was innocent or guilty, but he was determined to find out the truth. The town had made its judgment, the FBI had made its arrest, and the prosecution was confident in its case. But Marcus Reed had learned that the truth was often more complicated than it first appeared, and he was prepared to dig as deep as necessary to uncover it. The stage was set for a confrontation between accepted wisdom and stubborn investigation, between a community's need for closure and one man's commitment to justice. Sarah Mitchell's fate hung in the balance, and she didn't even know that someone was fighting for her. The real story of the Cedar Ridge bank robbery was about to begin. Marcus Reed had spent 30 years learning that the devil lived in the details. While the rest of Cedar Ridge accepted the case against Sarah Mitchell as closed, Marcus began his investigation by studying everything the public could access about the bank robbery. He visited the library, read every newspaper article, and even drove past the bank multiple times to understand the physical layout and security measures. His first major discovery came from an unexpected source. Marcus had befriended Tom Bradley, a night security guard at the industrial complex near the bank. Tom worked the graveyard shift and often saw things that happened in the early morning hours when most people were asleep. During a casual conversation at the local diner, Tom mentioned something that made Marcus's detective instincts come alive. On the night of the bank robbery, Tom had noticed unusual activity at the computer repair shop where Sarah used to work. Someone had been inside the building around 2 in the morning, which was odd because the shop was supposed to be closed. Tom had assumed it was Bob Martinez, the owner, working late on a project. But when Marcus pressed for details, Tom admitted he hadn't actually seen who was inside. He had only noticed lights on and a car parked in the back lot. Marcus asked Tom to describe the car. It was a dark sedan, possibly black or navy blue. Tom couldn't remember the make or model, but he was certain it wasn't Sarah's red Honda Civic, which was well known around town. This detail intrigued Marcus because the computer repair shop would have had equipment capable of creating fake access cards and programming them with stolen data. The next piece of the puzzle came from Marcus's examination of the timeline. According to the FBI's case file, which Janet Crawford had shared during a chance encounter at the courthouse, the money transfers had been initiated at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the robbery, but Marcus discovered that the bank's security system logged Sarah's access card being used to enter the building at 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the transfers had already begun. This discrepancy bothered Marcus tremendously. If Sarah had been the thief, why would her access card show her entering the building after the crime was already in progress? It suggested either a mistake in the timing systems or that someone else had initiated the transfers before Sarah's card was used to enter the building. Marcus wondered if the FBI had noticed this detail or if they had been too focused on the overwhelming evidence pointing to Sarah. Marcus decided to investigate Bob Martinez, the owner of the computer repair shop. Bob had fired Sarah immediately after the FBI visit, claiming that keeping her employed would hurt his business. But Marcus discovered that Bob had been experiencing serious financial difficulties for months before the bank robbery. The shop was behind on rent, suppliers were demanding payment, and Bob had taken out several high-interest loans to keep the business operating. Through careful questioning of other business owners in town, Marcus learned that Bob had been desperately seeking buyers for his computer repair shop. He had approached several potential investors, but none had been willing to take on the shop's debts and uncertain future. Bob needed money quickly, and he needed a lot of it. The bank robbery had netted nearly $200,000, which would have been enough to pay off Bob's debts and give him a fresh start. Marcus also discovered that Bob Martinez had worked at the Cedar Ridge Community Bank 15 years earlier, before starting his computer repair business. He had left the bank under unclear circumstances, with rumors of disagreements with management about security procedures. This background gave Bob detailed knowledge of the bank's operations and security measures, information that would have been crucial for planning the electronic theft. The more Marcus investigated Bob Martinez, the more suspicious he became. Bob had the technical skills needed to execute the robbery. Intimate knowledge of both the bank and Sarah's work, access to equipment for creating fake cards, and a desperate financial motive. He also had the opportunity, as his presence at the computer shop in the middle of the night demonstrated. Marcus began following Bob discreetly, observing his routines and behavior. Bob seemed nervous and paranoid, constantly checking over his shoulder and varying his routes around town. He had also made several unexplained trips to the city, claiming to visit suppliers, but returning without any new inventory for his shop. Marcus suspected these trips might be related to laundering the stolen money. The breakthrough came when Marcus befriended Eddie Santos, a young man who worked part-time at Bob's computer repair shop. Eddie was a talkative kid who loved discussing technology and respected Marcus's questions about computer security. During one of their conversations, Eddie mentioned that Bob had been working on a special project in the weeks before the bank robbery. According to Eddie, Bob had been extremely secretive about this project, working on it after hours and keeping all the materials locked in his office. Eddie had assumed it was a custom job for a wealthy client, but he had noticed that Bob was using equipment typically associated with security card programming. Bob had also been researching banking security systems, claiming he was bidding on a contract to upgrade the systems for several local businesses. Eddie's information provided Marcus with a crucial link between Bob Martinez and the specific technical methods used in the bank robbery, but Marcus needed more concrete evidence to prove his theory. He decided to take a significant risk by attempting to gather physical evidence from Bob's computer repair shop. Marcus waited until Bob left town for another of his mysterious city trips, then approached Eddie with a story about needing emergency computer repair services. Eddie, eager to help and earn some extra money, agreed to let Marcus into the shop after hours. Marcus's real goal was to search Bob's office for any evidence of the security card programming equipment or materials related to the bank robbery. The search revealed more than Marcus had hoped for. Hidden in a locked drawer that Eddie helped him open, Marcus found several blank security cards identical to those used by the bank. He also discovered printed materials about the bank's security systems, including detailed technical specifications that would have been necessary for planning the electronic theft. Most damning of all, Marcus found Sarah's original access card, which Bob had obviously stolen and used to create the duplicate that had been found in the dumpster. Marcus photographed everything carefully, knowing that the evidence would be worthless if it couldn't be properly authenticated. He also found records of Bob's recent financial transactions, including several large cash deposits that had been made in different banks across the region. The pattern suggested systematic money laundering, with Bob converting the electronic theft into untraceable cash through multiple small transactions. Armed with this evidence, Marcus faced a difficult decision. He had no official authority to investigate the case, and his methods of gathering evidence had been questionable at best. The information he had discovered would likely be inadmissible in court due to the way he had obtained it. But Marcus knew that Sarah Mitchell was innocent and that the real criminal was about to escape justice while she faced decades in federal prison. Marcus decided to approach Janet Crawford, Sarah's lawyer, with his findings. Janet was initially skeptical of Marcus's involvement and concerned about the legal implications of his investigation. But as Marcus presented his evidence and explained his reasoning, Janet began to see the potential for reasonable doubt in the prosecution's case. The timeline discrepancy alone was significant, and the discovery of Sarah's original access card in Bob's possession was potentially explosive. Janet agreed to work with Marcus to present their findings to the FBI, but she warned that the evidence would need to be corroborated through legal means. They would need to find a way to get law enforcement to search Bob's shop officially, and they would need additional witnesses or documentation to support their theory. The challenge was building a case against Bob Martinez without compromising Sarah's defense. Meanwhile, Sarah's situation continued to deteriorate. The stress of the charges and community hostility was taking a severe toll on her mental and physical health. She had lost significant weight, was suffering from insomnia, and was battling depression. The plea deal offered by the prosecution was looking increasingly attractive, not because Sarah was guilty, but because she was running out of strength to fight. Marcus realized that time was running out. Bob Martinez was clearly preparing to disappear, possibly leaving the country with the stolen money. If Bob escaped before they could prove his guilt, Sarah would remain the only viable suspect, and her conviction would become virtually certain. Marcus needed to act quickly to prevent a massive miscarriage of justice. The retired detective began planning his next move carefully. He would need to gather more evidence, find additional witnesses, and convince the authorities to take a fresh look at the case. But he was running out of time, and Bob Martinez was becoming increasingly suspicious of the attention he was receiving. The real criminal was preparing to escape while an innocent woman faced destruction, and Marcus Reed was the only person standing between justice and a terrible mistake. The investigation had revealed the truth, but proving it would require courage, ingenuity, and a willingness to risk everything for justice. Marcus had spent his career fighting for the truth, and he wasn't about to stop now, even if it meant confronting a dangerous criminal who had fooled an entire town and the FBI. The next phase of the battle for Sarah Mitchell's freedom was about to begin, and Marcus Reed was ready for the fight of his life. The confrontation that would change everything began with a stroke of luck that Marcus Reed had earned through weeks of careful observation. On a grey March morning, he was conducting surveillance on Bob Martinez when he witnessed something that provided the final piece of the puzzle. Bob was meeting with a stranger in the parking lot of a truck stop outside town, and their interaction looked anything but innocent. Marcus positioned himself where he could observe without being seen and began photographing the encounter. The stranger was a well-dressed man who appeared to be in his 50s, driving an expensive car with out-of-state license plates. Bob handed the man a thick envelope, and in return received a briefcase. The exchange took less than 2 minutes, but Marcus's experienced eye recognized it immediately as a money laundering operation. After the stranger left, Marcus followed Bob back to town, maintaining a careful distance. Instead of returning to his shop, Bob drove to his house and went straight to his garage. Marcus parked down the street and waited, his camera ready. 20 minutes later, Bob emerged from the garage carrying 2 large suitcases, which he loaded into his car. Bob was preparing to disappear, probably within hours. Marcus knew he had to act immediately. He called Janet Crawford and explained the situation urgently. Janet contacted FBI agent Rebecca Torres, who had been the lead investigator on Sarah's case. Agent Torres was initially reluctant to listen to theories from a retired detective with no official standing. But Janet's insistence and Marcus's reputation from his Chicago days convinced her to at least hear them out. The meeting took place at Janet's law office, with Marcus presenting his evidence methodically. He showed the photographs from Bob's shop, explained the timeline discrepancy, detailed Bob's financial problems and banking background, and presented the evidence of the money laundering meeting. Agent Torres listened carefully, occasionally asking sharp questions that tested Marcus's theories and evidence. The most compelling evidence was the discovery of Sarah's original access card in Bob's possession. Marcus explained how Bob could have stolen the card, used it to create duplicates, and then planted the duplicate in the dumpster to frame Sarah. The timeline showed that the money transfers had begun before Sarah's card was supposedly used to enter the bank, suggesting that Bob had initiated the theft and then used Sarah's duplicate card to create false evidence. Agent Torres was experienced enough to recognize the significance of Marcus's findings, but she also understood the legal challenges they faced. The evidence Marcus had gathered would likely be inadmissible in court due to how it was obtained. They needed to find a legal way to search Bob's property and confirm the evidence through proper channels. They also needed to act quickly before Bob disappeared with the stolen money. Agent Torres decided to take a calculated risk. She obtained an emergency search warrant for Bob's computer repair shop and residence, based on Marcus's photographs and Eddie Santos's testimony about Bob's suspicious activities in the weeks before the robbery. The warrant was narrow in scope, but it would allow them to search for evidence of security card programming equipment and materials related to the bank robbery. The FBI search began at dawn, with agents simultaneously entering Bob's shop and home. At the computer repair shop, they immediately found the blank security cards and programming equipment that Marcus had photographed. They also discovered detailed floor plans of the bank, security system specifications, and research materials about electronic banking systems. The evidence was overwhelming and clearly linked to the bank robbery. At Bob's house, agents found even more damning evidence. In Bob's home office, they discovered financial records showing the systematic laundering of nearly $200,000 through multiple banks and accounts. They also found Sarah's original access card, exactly where Marcus had said it would be. Most importantly, they found Bob's detailed plan for the robbery, including his strategy for framing Sarah Mitchell. Bob's plan had been sophisticated and carefully thought out. He had stolen Sarah's access card weeks before the robbery, created duplicates, and used his knowledge of her work schedule and personal habits to plan the perfect frame job. He had known that Sarah worked alone most evenings and rarely had witnesses to her whereabouts. He had also known that her recent financial difficulties would provide a convincing motive for the crime. The timing of the arrest was crucial because Bob was indeed preparing to flee. Agents found plane tickets to a non-extradition country, fake identity documents, and over $50,000 in cash hidden throughout his house. Bob had been planning to disappear permanently, leaving Sarah to face decades in federal prison for crimes she didn't commit. When FBI agents arrested Bob Martinez at his home, his reaction confirmed everything Marcus had suspected. Bob immediately tried to negotiate a deal, claiming he could provide information about other crimes in exchange for reduced charges. He showed no remorse for what he had done to Sarah, treating her destruction as an acceptable cost of his criminal enterprise. The evidence against Bob was so overwhelming that his lawyer advised him to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a trial. Bob eventually pleaded guilty to all charges related to the bank robbery, computer fraud, and money laundering. He also admitted to stealing Sarah's access card and deliberately framing her for the crimes. His confession provided the final confirmation of Sarah's innocence and Marcus's investigation. The dismissal of charges against Sarah Mitchell was announced at a packed press conference, with FBI agent Torres publicly acknowledging the errors in the original investigation. Agent Torres praised Marcus Reed's investigative work and admitted that the FBI had been too quick to accept the obvious explanation without considering alternative theories. The agent also announced that the stolen money had been recovered and would be returned to the bank and its customers. The reaction in Cedar Ridge was immediate and intense. The community that had been so quick to condemn Sarah Mitchell was now faced with the uncomfortable truth that they had been wrong about everything. The real criminal had been someone they trusted and respected, while the woman they had branded as a thief had been completely innocent. The collective guilt and shame were overwhelming. Sarah's vindication brought mixed emotions. She was relieved to be cleared of the charges, but the damage to her life had been enormous. She had lost her home, her career, her reputation, and her sense of security. Many of the people who had abandoned her during the crisis were now eager to apologize and make amends, but Sarah found it difficult to forgive those who had been so quick to judge her. The town's response to Sarah's exoneration varied widely. Some people were genuinely remorseful and worked hard to rebuild their relationship with her. Others were defensive and angry, claiming they had been deceived just as much as Sarah had been. A few refused to admit they had been wrong, suggesting that Sarah must have been involved somehow, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Marcus Reed became a local hero, praised for his persistence and investigative skills. The Chicago Police Department even offered him a consulting position, impressed by his work on the case. But Marcus was most satisfied by the knowledge that he had prevented a terrible miscarriage of justice. He had seen too many innocent people destroyed by faulty investigations during his career, and he was proud to have made a difference in Sarah's case. The legal aftermath was complex and lengthy. Sarah filed civil lawsuits against several parties, including the town newspaper that had printed inflammatory articles about her case, and individuals who had engaged in harassment and vandalism. Most of these cases were settled out of court, providing Sarah with some financial compensation for her losses, though no amount of money could fully repair the damage to her life. Bob Martinez was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, with additional time for the money laundering charges. The judge noted that Bob's crime had been particularly heinous because of his deliberate effort to frame an innocent person. The sentence was intended to reflect not just the financial crimes, but also the destruction Bob had caused to Sarah's life and reputation. The Cedar Ridge Community Bank implemented new security measures to prevent similar crimes in the future. They also established a fund to compensate customers who had been affected by the robbery, and they publicly apologized to Sarah Mitchell for the role their inadequate security had played in allowing her to be framed. Sarah eventually decided to leave Cedar Ridge, finding it impossible to rebuild her life in a community where she would always be remembered as the woman who had been falsely accused. She moved to a different state, changed her name, and started over in a place where no one knew her history. The transition was difficult, but Sarah gradually rebuilt her career and her confidence. Marcus Reed continued living in Cedar Ridge, but his experience with the case changed his retirement plans. He began working as a private investigator, specializing in cases where he suspected that innocent people had been wrongly accused. His success in Sarah's case gave him credibility with both law enforcement and defense attorneys, and he found new purpose in his work. The case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of rush to judgment and the importance of thorough investigation. Law enforcement agencies used it as a training example, showing how even experienced investigators could be fooled by sophisticated criminals who knew how to manipulate evidence and exploit biases. To the residents of Cedar Ridge, the case was a painful lesson about the fragility of reputation and the power of community opinion. Many people reflected on how quickly they had been willing to believe the worst about someone they had known and respected. The experience changed how the community responded to future controversies, with more people insisting on due process and withholding judgment until all facts were known. The story of Sarah Mitchell's false accusation and eventual vindication spread far beyond Cedar Ridge, becoming a symbol of the importance of perseverance in the pursuit of justice. Marcus Reed's investigation demonstrated that one person's determination to uncover the truth could make all the difference, even when the entire world seemed convinced of a lie. In the end, the case revealed not just the identity of a criminal, but also the character of a community. Cedar Ridge had failed Sarah Mitchell when she needed support most, but some individuals had stood by her, and one retired detective had refused to accept an injustice. The real story wasn't just about a bank robbery and a false accusation, but about the choices people make when faced with uncertainty and the courage required to stand up for truth when everyone else has given up looking for it. Sarah Mitchell's name was finally cleared, Bob Martinez was in prison where he belonged, and Marcus Reed had proven that justice was still possible when good people refused to give up. The town that had branded her as a criminal had learned a hard lesson about the difference between appearance and reality, between suspicion and proof, and between the easy answer and the right one.